The Noctua NH-U12A Chromax.Black is one of the most anticipated CPU coolers of the year, mainly because it was good to begin with, but a lot of people wanted it to say, look better. And this is what this cooler is, because it looks great. The Noctua NH-U12A Chromax.Black is the same CPU cooler as the Noctua NH-U12A, apart from a key difference, the color, which is the same as all the Achromax.Black series products. This cooler has another thing going for it, the Noctua NF-A12X25 PWM Achromax.Black fans, which again are one of the most requested products of the year, as the NF-A12X25 was regarded as one of the best fans on the market, but a lot of people had some issues with its color. The Noctua NH-U12A Chromax.Black is available for purchase right now for no less than $146 or the equivalent in euros. This makes the Chromax.Black variant of the NH-U12A around $30 more expensive, which is not a surprise at all, as the Achromax.Black variants of the products are pricier on average, regardless of what model we talk about. However, the prices are not set in stone, especially nowadays, so don't get surprised if you'll find this cooler either for more or for less. One of the main advantages of the NH-U12A is the size. While the NH-D15 is better and is regarded as one of the best air CPU coolers on the market, it has one massive, no pun intended, disadvantage: its large size. The NH-U12A still performs great, but without that drawback, which opens many possibilities, including using the cooler with micro ATX systems. The great clearance offered by this CPU cooler is not only given by its small footprint, but also because the NH-U12A has an offset design on the heatsink. This will further push the front fan away from the RAM slots of the motherboard. Speaking of the heatsink, the NH-U12A heatsink has a single tower design with the before mentioned offsets for better clearance around the front of the CPU cooler. The cooler uses no less than 50 aluminum-made cooling fins, which are shaped downwards on the sides of the heatsink. The bending on the fins has a dual purpose. First, it greatly increases the overall structural rigidity of the heatsink, as in essence, each cooling fin is supported by those found above and below. The second purpose of this is to create a channel for the airflow generated by the fans. The fins bent at the edges will prevent the air from escaping on the sides and force it through the heatsink. The NH-U12A uses 7 heat pipes, which are made from nickel-plated copper and have a standard outer diameter of 6 mm. As is the case with many air CPU coolers, these are arranged in the traditional U shape to help with the heat dissipation and to provide a solid base for the cooling fins. The baseplate of the cooler is made from the same nickel-plated copper as the before mentioned heat pipes. The surface of the baseplate is smooth and has a mirror-like reflection with subtle circular marks left from the manufacturing process. The contact between the heat pipes and the baseplate of the CPU cooler is done through soldering the two components together, right at the back of the baseplate. This method is considered to be the best way for heat transfer between two surfaces. The fan used on the NH-U12A are the well-known Noctua NF-A12X25 PWM, but in a black color scheme, which is another product that was highly requested and expected this year. And as with other Achromax.Black products, these do not disappoint as they look stunning. The NF-A12X25 PWM as a fan is jam-packed full of technology, things such as the material used to make the impellers and the hub, which allows for a smaller gap between the tip of the impellers and the inner side of the fan frame. Other features include the SSO bearing system. Also, to dampen any vibrations which might appear, the corners of both fans are covered on both sides by soft rubber pads. This has been a thing for many years, especially for Noctua fans and Noctua air CPU coolers. Both fans have a minimum speed of 450 RPM and a maximum speed of 2000 RPM. Thankfully, they can be controlled via PWM thanks to their 4-pin power connector. Speaking of connectors, the wires are covered by high-quality synthetic sleeving. In terms of the accessories, it's what we can expect from a high-end CPU cooler that is a Noctua brand. The box that holds all the accessories is filled with mostly the mounting system and a few accessories. We start with the user manual, 2 low noise adapters, a metal backplate, 1 tube of NT-H1 thermal compound, a metal Phillips screwdriver, a case badge, a Y splitter cable to power both fans from the same fan header, and the components of the Secofirm 2 mounting system, which includes the before mentioned backplate, plastic spacers, metal studs, mounting bars, and metal nuts. The installation procedure is almost the same for all Noctua CPU coolers. I say almost because the NH-U12A Chromax.Black is a bit different in this regard. Why? Because it must accommodate for all CPU sockets, including the new Intel LGA 1700 socket. The only difference that you will notice is that instead of a solid backplate with studs that are already pre-installed there, now you must do it yourself. Speaking of the backplate, you get it and then insert the metal bolts in the correct spacing for your socket. Afterwards, you use these plastic C-clips to hold the bolts in place and install everything at the back of the motherboard. Moving towards the front of the CPU socket, you get the required plastic spacers and install them over the bolts. Afterwards, you place the two mounting bars over the bolts and secure them with these metal nuts. Finally, you apply the thermal compound on the CPU surface and place the heatsink over the mounting bars. You secure it by tightening the two spring-loaded screws, and that's it. The cooler is installed. Now you have to install the two fans on the heatsink and connect them to the fan headers of your choice. With the cooler installed, it's easy to see why everyone wanted a Achromax.Black version of the NH-U12A, because it looks stunning. Not only that, but it will look good with any motherboard and graphics cards combination, because of the all black design and the mix of matte black finish and the satin one on the heatsink and fans. In terms of the clearance, there's plenty to talk about. The RAM clearance is great thanks to the asymmetrical design of the heatsink and heat pipes. The front fan does not even reach the RAM slots of the motherboard, let alone interfere with the RAM modules. When we talk about the graphics card clearance, there is 31.09mm of space between the backplate of the graphics cards and the side of the heatsink and the fan. This provides a good access to the top-mounted M.2 socket that is often found on modern motherboards. Before we test the CPU cooler, it's time for you to hear a noise sample of the cooler and its fans. I am doing this because this is a better way to showcase the noise you will experience with the tested cooler, as while a decibel value is useful for comparison, it does not consider additional noises caused by the bearing of the CPU cooler fans, vibrations, and so on. With both fans spinning at their maximum rated speed of 2000 RPM, the Noctua NH-U12A Chromax.Black reached a maximum noise output of 41 decibels with the measuring device placed at the standard distance of 10 cm away from the system and the CPU cooler. This decibel value is identical with that of a regular NH-U12A, which is not surprising at all as both coolers are identical apart from the color of the fans and the heatsink. The testing of each CPU cooler is done with an Intel i9-9900K running both at its factory frequency and settings and overclocked manually to 5 GHz on all cores. This is done to push each tested CPU cooler to its limits and differentiate CPU coolers that are good enough for daily usage and CPU coolers that can handle CPU overclocking. The first test uses the Intel Burn Test V2 benchmark, a synthetic benchmark that simulates a CPU load that you will encounter in your daily usage, especially in gaming. And in this test, the NH-U12A Chromax.Black matched the original NH-U12A cooler, with a maximum temperature of 59 degrees Celsius with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores and the ambient temperature fixed at 26 degrees Celsius. However, the next test is where each CPU cooler is pushed to its limits, some even above that, as this test uses the FPU stability test of the AIDA64 software suite. This test will create an unrealistically high load for the CPU, something which you will rarely if ever encounter in your daily usage. In fact, the only quote-unquote natural load that gets close to this is heavy video rendering with the CPU as the only rendering unit. And in this test, the NH-U12A reached a maximum temperature of 87 degrees Celsius with the same 26 degrees Celsius ambient temperature. This places the NH-U12A Chromax.Black a mere 3 degrees Celsius behind the Noctua NH-D15, which is a big cooler and one of the best around. The Noctua NH-U12A Chromax.Black delivers on every promise, especially that of looking much better than its regular variant. Yes, you will pay more just for a coat of paint, but it's worth it if the design of your CPU cooler matters to you that much. And given the requests for this cooler to exist, it's pretty clear that many people wanted it, and here we have it. The performance is great for a cooler of this size, and speaking of sizes, this cooler is smaller than the NH-D15 and solves the only issues that the NH-D15 had, its average clearance. The NH-U12A offers a great clearance for the RAM modules and a good clearance for the PCIe slots, and that's thanks to both the size and the offset design of the heat pipes. The noise output is not low, but that was to be expected with two fans spinning at a maximum of 2000 rpm. Fortunately, it's not a bad choice, and in all honesty, nobody will run both fans at their maximum speed daily anyway. However, yes, it could have been lower overall, which is one of, if not the only inconvenience of this CPU cooler. The mounting system has been refined across the board, and now it's just easy to work with. Mind you, it was already easy to work with, but given the introduction of new CPU sockets, Noctua had to do some changes to accommodate them. The NH-U12A is a great CPU cooler because it performs well and looks great, and it is what everyone was looking for ever since the original NH-U12A was launched. The installation is easy, the mounting system is solid, and the build quality is absolutely exceptional. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and also if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the subscriber pages of this channel.